A breathtaking royal moment has sent shockwaves through palace watchers and reignited debate across the world.
For more than 100 years, one tiara has moved through British royal history like a thread stitching 4 generations of women together. Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth II, Diana, Princess of Wales, and now Catherine, Princess of Wales. It is not the most valuable piece in the royal collection, nor the most photographed on any single night. But few objects carry as much emotional weight or as much unspoken history as the diamond and pearl tiara known today as the Cambridge Lover's Knot. This is the real story of that tiara, and of the real woman who wears it now, not through invented palace intrigue or imagined glances across a ballroom, but through what has actually been documented, confirmed, and spoken aloud by the people involved. The story begins not with Catherine, and not even with Diana, but with Queen Mary, grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II. In 1913, Mary commissioned the London jeweler Gerard to create a diamond tiara built around a design she had long admired, a similar lover's knot piece that had belonged to her own grandmother, Princess Augusta, Duchess of Cambridge. Mary wanted something of her own that echoed that inheritance, and the result was a tiara built from diamond arches strung with 19 hanging pearls, a design so distinctive it would go on to define nearly every photograph taken of the women who later wore it. The tiara passed, as royal jewels do, through the family. It eventually reached Queen Elizabeth II, who in 1981 lent it to the 20-year-old Diana Spencer shortly after her marriage to Prince Charles. It became one of Diana's most recognizable pieces, worn at state banquets and galas throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. Though Diana herself reportedly found the tiara heavy and, at times, physically uncomfortable to wear for long evenings. After her divorce in 1996 and her death in 1997, the tiara was returned to the royal vaults and largely disappeared from public view. It stayed there until 2015, when Queen Elizabeth II lent the tiara to Catherine, then Duchess of Cambridge, who wore it for the first time at that year's diplomatic reception. In the decade since, it has become Catherine's signature piece, the tiara she reaches for most often at state banquets, more than any of the 3 other tiaras in her rotation. The Cartier halo she wore on her wedding day in 2011, the Lotus Flower tiara, and the Strathmore Rose tiara. Wearing it, as one royal jewelry historian has noted, visually links 3 generations of royal women across more than a century of the monarchy's history. To understand why Catherine's more recent appearances in the tiara have carried such visible emotional weight, it helps to look at what actually happened to her, in her own words, over the 2 years leading up to them. In January 2024, Kensington Palace announced that Catherine had undergone major abdominal surgery and would step back from public duties to recover. At the time, the palace said doctors believed the condition was non-cancerous. That changed in March 2024, when Catherine released a personal video revealing that tests conducted after her surgery had in fact found cancer, and that she had begun a course of what she described as preventative chemotherapy. She said the news had come as a significant shock to her and her husband, Prince William, and that the couple had spent weeks processing it privately before going public, largely for the sake of their 3 young children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Catherine has never disclosed what type of cancer she had, and Kensington Palace has consistently declined to provide further medical detail, citing her right to privacy. What she has shared in a series of personal updates over the following 2 years is a fairly candid account of what the experience actually felt like. In June 2020, for she said treatment was ongoing and that there were, in her words, good days and bad days. She made her first public appearance since the diagnosis that same month at Trooping the Color. By September 2020, for she announced she had completed chemotherapy and was, as she put it, cancer-free. In January 2025, nearly a year after her original announcement, she confirmed she was in remission, writing that adjusting to a new normal takes time, and thanking the public for their support throughout what she called a roller coaster of a year. Even after that announcement, Catherine has continued to speak openly about how difficult the recovery period has actually been, a detail that cuts against any simple narrative of a clean, triumphant comeback. During a hospital visit in July 2025, She told patients that finding a new normal after treatment is not smooth, and that the process continues to be genuinely hard even once the medical side of it is over. What followed was not a single dramatic reentrance, but a gradual, well-documented resumption of public duties that picked up noticeably through 2025 and into 2026. Catherine's tiara appearances in particular became a visible marker of that return, because state banquets, grand, ceremonial, heavily photographed occasions attended by visiting heads of state, are exactly the kind of event she had been absent from during her treatment. On July 8, 2025, Catherine attended a state banquet at Windsor Castle honoring the President of France, her first tiara appearance of that scale since her diagnosis. She wore the lover's, not tiara, with a gold lace gown and coat by British designer Philippa Lepley, paired with the Greville chandelier earrings, a Cartier piece from 1914 that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Camilla, hosting alongside King Charles III, wore the Belgian sapphire tiara, a piece that began as a necklace belonging to a 19th-century Belgian princess before Elizabeth II had it reset as a tiara in the 1960s. That September, Catherine wore the lover's not again for the state banquet honoring President Donald Trump's second state visit to Britain, a historically unusual occasion in its own right, since Trump became the first elected head of state to be hosted for two separate state visits by a British monarch. She was seated near the president during the banquet, held in St. George's Hall at Windsor and attended by roughly 160 guests, including a number of prominent business figures. Then, in December 2025, at a state banquet honoring the President of Germany, Catherine wore a different tiara entirely for the first time in years, the Oriental Circlet, a Victorian-era piece originally created for Queen Alexandra and traditionally considered one reserved for queens rather than princesses. Royal commentators describe the choice as a clear signal, deliberate, as these things always are in royal wardrobe planning, that Catherine's role and visibility were both expanding. 3 state visits within a single calendar year is, by historical standards, unusual. Britain had not hosted that many in one year for decades. That Catherine, only months removed from announcing her recovery, attended all 3 says less about jewelry than it does about the pace at which she chose to resume the most visible and physically demanding parts of her public role. It's worth separating the documented facts from the layer of interpretation that tends to accumulate around royal jewelry, because that interpretation is not baseless. It's just usually more modest than headlines suggest. Royal historians and jewelry experts generally agree that tiara choices at state events are made deliberately, often by Catherine herself in consultation with the palace's jewelry vault, and that they are read by royal watchers as a kind of visual language. Wearing a piece associated with Diana signals continuity with a beloved public figure. Wearing something newly unlocked from the vault, like the Oriental Circlet, signals evolution or a widening of role. But there is a meaningful difference between saying a wardrobe choice carries symbolic weight, which is well documented and something royals and their staff openly acknowledge, and inventing specific private conversations, rivalries, or reactions between named royal family members that were never actually reported by anyone present. What can be said honestly is this. The lover's knot tiara has, across more than 100 years, been worn by 4 women whose public lives were each shaped by scrutiny in very different ways. A queen consort managing the House of Windsor through the early 20th century. A young princess whose life and death made her one of the most photographed women in the world. And now a future queen who spent 2 of the most consequential years of her public life dealing with a serious illness largely out of view. That thread is real, and it doesn't need embellishment to be affecting. Search for Catherine's tiara appearances online, and you will find a great deal of content. YouTube videos, aggregator articles, social posts. That goes well beyond what has actually been reported. Invented glances between Camilla and Catherine, private ballroom power struggles, secret palace exiles, imagined internal monologues as a tiara comes off before a mirror. None of this is drawn from any statement, interview, biographer, or credentialed royal correspondent. It's speculative narrative dressed up as reporting, built to generate engagement through implied scandal rather than to inform. That doesn't mean the real story is dull. A woman who spent much of 2024 quietly undergoing cancer treatment, who spoke with unusual candor about how hard recovery actually was even after the diagnosis lifted, and who then spent 2025 gradually reclaiming one of the most visible, high-pressure parts of her public role. State banquets, watched by millions, standing beside world leaders, is already a genuinely compelling story. It just happens to be one that doesn't require fabricating what anyone was thinking. Sources consulted include reporting from ABC News, Fox News, Time, The Court Jeweler, and JCK, along with Kensington Palace's public statements and Catherine's own recorded remarks.